The late afternoon sun cast long, clean shadows across the lawn, striping the manicured turf of Oakwood Heights in gold and green. From my back patio, I admired my handiwork, a small, elegant shed tucked neatly into the corner of the yard. It wasn't a cheap metal box from a big box store, but a structure of cedar and glass I had designed and built myself. A quiet retreat for my woodworking, my sanctuary from the endless Zoom calls and architectural renderings that consumed my days. The scent of fresh-cut wood still clung to the air. For the first time in months, I felt a profound sense of peace. That peace was shattered by a clipped, unnaturally pleasant voice drifting over my fence. "That's a lovely structure, Mr. Thompson." I turned, standing just on the other side of my property line. On the common area greenbelt that ran behind our houses were two figures. One was a nondescript man in a tight polo shirt bearing the logo of Patriot Management, our HOA's administrative arm. He held a clipboard and a digital camera. The other was Carol Peterson. Carol was the newly elected president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. She had won her position on a hardline, return to excellence platform, promising to restore the neighborhood's prestige by cracking down on the minor infractions that had supposedly been allowed to slide for years. In practice, this meant a flurry of violation notices for everything from mismatched mailbox paint to trash cans left out an hour too long. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her posture ramrod straight, a thin, unsmiling line for a mouth that she somehow managed to curve into a smile without conveying an ounce of warmth. "It would be a shame," she continued, her voice carrying across the 6 feet of my lawn between us, loud enough for my neighbors on either side to hear, "if it violated Covenant 8.42. The inspector from Patriot Management raised his camera and took a series of sharp, clinical photos of my shed. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like a judgment. The social humiliation was immediate and exquisitely public. Mrs. Gable, 2 doors down, paused her gardening to watch. Mr. Henderson, on the other side, slowly lowered his newspaper. I wasn't just a homeowner in his yard. I was a spectacle, an example being made. I am an architect. My life is built on rules, on precision, on understanding how structures and systems fit together. I had read the CC&Rs. I had submitted my plans to the Architectural Control Committee ACC and received written approval. I had followed every rule to the letter. I walked to the edge of my patio, careful to remain on my own property. "Good afternoon, Carol," I said, my voice measured and calm, betraying none of the cold anger coiling in my stomach. "The ACC approved the plans for this shed 2 months ago. I have the signed approval form in my office." Carol's smile tightened. "The ACC approves aesthetics, Michael. They don't and can't override the covenants. And Section 8.4.2 is very clear about the preservation of view corridors." She gestured vaguely toward the distant, hazy line of hills barely visible between the rooftops. "Your structure, lovely as it is, appears to impede that view from the common area." The inspector made another note on his clipboard, the scratching of his pen audible in the quiet afternoon. A view corridor. The term was so nebulously bureaucratic, so perfectly designed for subjective enforcement, that it felt like a parody. Yet the look on Carol's face was one of deadly seriousness. She wasn't debating. She was declaring. "I think you'll find there's no designated view corridor on this section of the plat map," I stated, keeping my tone informational, not argumentative. "The board will be the final arbiter of that," she said, the smile finally vanishing. "You can expect a notice." And with that, she turned and walked away, the inspector trailing in her wake like a pilot fish. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered. My sanctuary, my small pocket of peace, was now a battlefield. The opening shot had not been a cannon, but the click of a camera and a citation from a rulebook, wielded with the quiet, chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. That evening, the house was filled with the scent of garlic and basil from the pasta sauce Sarah was simmering on the stove. Our home was our sanctuary, a meticulously restored 1960s ranch that we had poured our hearts and savings into. For me, an architect who spent his days designing sterile corporate spaces, the warmth of its hardwood floors and the familiar comfort of its rooms were a necessary antidote. For Sarah, a county sheriff, it was the one place where she could shed the weight of her uniform and the grim realities of her job. I sat at the kitchen island, a glass of wine untouched in front of me, recounting the incident with Carol. Sarah listened patiently, stirring the sauce, her expression unreadable. "A view corridor," she said finally, setting the wooden spoon down. "That sounds deliberately vague." "It's worse than vague. I don't think it's real," I said, running a hand through my hair. I checked the CC&Rs again after she left. Section 8.4.2 is titled Architectural Harmony and Aesthetics. It's a full page of boilerplate about maintaining a pleasing and uniform appearance. The phrase view corridor isn't in there, not once. Sarah came over and leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, in her civilian clothes, a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. She looked smaller, softer, but her eyes had the same sharp, analytical focus they did when she was in uniform. "So, she's inventing a violation based on a subjective interpretation of a vague clause." "Exactly. And she did it in front of half the neighborhood. It was pure intimidation." We had known Carol was a problem since she'd taken over the board 3 months ago. Her weekly email blasts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive prose, filled with reminders about lawn maintenance and thinly veiled threats of fines. She had replaced the friendly, long-serving landscaping company with a cheaper, more aggressive crew. She had tried to implement a rule requiring all front door paint to be one of 3 pre-approved shades of beige. Carol wasn't just enforcing rules. She was consolidating power, turning our quiet community into her personal fiefdom. "Let's look at the closing documents," Sarah suggested. She retrieved the heavy binder from the office, and we spread the papers across the island. Title reports, inspection summaries, and the thick, intimidating document that governed our lives here, the covenants, conditions and restrictions of Oakwood Heights. We found the page for Farbor 8.4.2, and Sarah traced the dense paragraph with her finger. "This one is dangerously vague," she remarked, her voice quiet. "All structures must exist in harmony with the community's overall aesthetic and preserve the natural topography and sightlines as determined by the board. It's how they can get you on anything. As determined by the board is the weapon." The shed was more than just a hobby space for me. In the era of remote work, my office had bled into every corner of the house. My drafting table was in the guest room, my models on the dining table. The line between work and life had evaporated. The shed was my attempt to redraw it. It was a space that belonged only to me, a place for the satisfying, tangible work of my hands, not the abstract, digital work of my career. It was my escape, and Carol was trying to take it away. "I have the ACC approval," I said, more to myself than to Sarah. "That has to count for something." "It counts," Sarah agreed. "But Carol isn't interested in a reasonable discussion. She's interested in making a point. She's establishing dominance. Document everything, Michael, every conversation, every letter. If she's going to fight with paper, we're going to build a fortress of it." A few days later, a stiff, cream-colored envelope was taped to our front door. It was a courtesy notice, a polite, Non-binding heads up. It has come to our attention that the new accessory structure on your lot may be in violation of CC&R 408.4.2 regarding view corridor preservation. Please contact Patriot Management to discuss remediation. I emailed them, attaching a PDF of my ACC approval and a polite note explaining that the shed was fully compliant. I received an automated reply. I thought, naively, that this might be the end of it. A simple misunderstanding, cleared up by documentation. 1 week later, I learned how wrong I was. The mail carrier handed me a thin green card to sign, the kind that accompanies certified mail. The letter inside was from Patriot Management, on behalf of the Oakwood Heights HOA. It was no longer a courtesy. It was a formal violation notice. The language was cold, impersonal, and absolute. Pursuant to the authority vested in the board by the governing documents, you are hereby notified of a violation of CC&R 408.4.2, Architectural Harmony and Aesthetics. The unapproved obstruction of the common area view corridor by the recently erected structure on your lot must be rectified. A fine of $100 has been assessed to your account. You have 14 days from the date of this notice to remove the offending structure. Failure to comply will result in further fines and corrective action. My ACC approval wasn't mentioned. My email was ignored. The judgment had been rendered. The letter felt less like a notice and more like a declaration of war. It was impersonal, deeply unfair, and it made the blood pound in my ears. This was no longer about a shed. It was about our home. My first instinct was to fight fire with fire, to draft a scathing legal response citing chapter and verse of property law. But Sarah, ever the strategist, counseled a different approach. Don't escalate in writing yet, she advised, examining the violation notice under the kitchen light. It gives them a paper trail to build a case against you. Go to the monthly meeting. Approach them in person, calmly. Make your case in the public forum. Let the other residents see you being reasonable. If Carol shoots you down, she looks like a tyrant. It sounded like a solid plan. The next Tuesday evening, I walked into the sterile, fluorescent-lit community clubhouse. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. About 20 residents were scattered among the folding chairs, most looking bored. At the long table at the front sat the 5 members of the HOA board. Carol was in the center, a gavel and a neat stack of papers in front of her. She presided over the meeting with an air of strained patience, as if the proceedings were an unfortunate but necessary distraction from her real work. The meeting droned on with tedious reports from the landscaping committee and a long, circular debate about holiday decoration regulations. Finally, Carol announced the open forum, the brief period when residents could voice their concerns. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the small lectern at the front of the room. Good evening, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is Michael Thompson, from 124 Laurel Lane. I'm here tonight to seek clarification on a violation notice I received regarding the shed in my backyard. Carol looked at me, her expression a mask of polite indifference. Mr. Thompson. Yes. We are aware of the situation. What is your question? My question is about the basis for the violation, I said, holding up a copy of my ACC approval. This structure was fully approved by the Architectural Control Committee before a single board was cut. The notice cites a view corridor violation, but I can find no mention of a designated view corridor on my lot in the CC&Rs or the official plat map. I laid out my case logically, professionally, just as I would for a client. I spoke about the rules, the process I had followed, and the lack of any documentary basis for the fine. I ended by politely requesting that the board review the matter and rescind the violation. When I finished, the room was quiet. A few residents looked at me with sympathy. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, looking down at their notes. Carol let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she spoke. "Thank you for your comments, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "However, the interpretation of the covenants is the explicit duty of the board. The board has reviewed the matter and unanimously determined that the structure's placement negatively impacts the aesthetic sightlines of the community, which falls under the purview of Section 8.4.2. The ACC's approval was for the design, not for a placement that violates the covenants." It was a masterful piece of bureaucratic doublespeak. She had twisted the situation to make it sound as though the ACC and the board were two separate, warring entities, and that I had foolishly been caught in the crossfire. "With all due respect, Carol," I pressed, "an interpretation has to be based on something tangible. What specific sightline is being blocked? Where is this view corridor officially defined?" Her eyes narrowed. "It is defined by the board's determination. We were elected to make these judgments on behalf of the community to protect property values for everyone. Perhaps you should have read the rules more closely before you built." She picked up her gavel. "Next speaker." I stood at the lectern, stunned. She hadn't just dismissed me. She had publicly humiliated me. She had painted me as a careless homeowner who didn't read the rules, and she had done it in front of my neighbors. I walked back to my seat, my face burning. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I had followed the rules, presented my case reasonably, and been shut down by an absolute, unquestionable decree. I had walked in seeking a conversation and walked out with a verdict. Leaving the clubhouse, the cool night air did little to quell the hot anger inside me. I had underestimated her. This wasn't about a view. This was a raw, naked exercise of power. The next letter arrived a week later. The fine had not been rescinded. In fact, it was now escalating, as the violation cited in our notice of date has not been rectified. Fines are now accruing at a rate of $25 per day, in accordance with the association's fine schedule. Your current balance is $275. "This is insane," I said, slapping the letter down on the kitchen table. "She's not just ignoring me. She's punishing me for speaking up." Sarah read the letter, her jaw tight. "Okay, the soft approach failed. Now we go hard. It's time to dig. There has to be something in the HOA's own records that contradicts her." Our evenings transformed into a grim routine of forensic accounting and legal research. We downloaded every document available from the HOA's clunky online portal, years of board meeting minutes, annual budgets, old newsletters, and the bylaws. We printed them out, spreading them across the dining room table, highlighting and cross-referencing. It was a mountain of tedious, poorly written text. But we were determined. One night, scrolling through the minutes from a meeting held 2 years before Carol's reign, I found something. A dispute over a fence had been settled by a reference to the original subdivision plat map, survey number 78B, on file with the county recorder, which shall be the final authority on all easements and property lines. "That's it," I said to Sarah, pointing at the screen. "That's our next step. She can invent interpretations of the CC&Rs all day, but she can't invent a line on an official county map." The next Saturday, while doing yard work, I saw Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, struggling to drag her large trash and recycling bins up her sloping driveway. She was a widow on a fixed income, a sweet woman who always had a kind word and a plate of cookies for us at Christmas. I walked over to help. "Oh, "Thank you, Michael," she said, breathing heavily. "These things seem to get heavier every year." "No problem at all," I said, easily wheeling the bins up to her garage. As I set them down, I noticed a small army of ceramic garden gnomes arranged cheerfully in her flower bed. They were whimsical and a little tacky, but they were harmless. "I see the gnomes are back," I commented with a smile. Her face fell. "For now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I got another notice from Carol. She says they violate the rule about lawn ornaments of a whimsical nature. $25. I can't afford that, but my husband, George, he gave them to me. One for every anniversary. It feels wrong to put them away." My blood ran cold. A rule against whimsical ornaments. It was the most petty, cruel application of power I could imagine. They were harassing an elderly widow over garden gnomes. "Mrs. Gable," I said gently, "did you know that you have the right to appeal that fine at a hearing?" She wrung her hands. "Oh, I wouldn't know what to say. Carol is so intimidating. At the meetings, she makes you feel so small." It was in that moment that my fight became about more than just my shed. It was about Mrs. Gable and her gnomes. It was about every resident who had been bullied into compliance by vague rules and public humiliation. Carol hadn't just targeted me. She was preying on the most vulnerable members of our community, the ones least likely to fight back. Her enforcement wasn't about excellence. It was selective, vindictive, and predatory. Later that day, another email from Patriot Management landed in my inbox. It was a notice of hearing. My case was being escalated to a formal hearing before the ACC, a committee now stacked with Carol's recent appointees. The email informed me that fines would continue to accrue until the matter was resolved. The pressure was mounting, a slow, methodical tightening of the screws. The following Monday, I took a personal day and drove downtown to the county administration building, a hulking concrete edifice from the 1970s. The recorder of deeds office was in the basement, a place with pale green walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the faint, musty smell of old paper and microfilm. Behind a scratched plexiglass window sat a man who looked as though he had been part of the building's original fixtures. He had a weary face, a messy halo of gray hair, and a nameplate that read, "Robert, Senior Records Clerk." "I'm looking for the plat map for the Oakwood Heights subdivision," I said, pushing the reference number I'd found in the minutes under the glass. "Survey, number 78B. Robert peered at the number through his bifocals, grunted, and disappeared into a back room filled with enormous, leather-bound plat books. The silence was broken only by the hum of the lights and the distant whir of a microfilm reader. He returned a few minutes later, heaving a dusty, oversized book onto the counter with a loud thud. "There you go," he said. "Oakwood Heights, filed 1978. He opened the book to the correct page. There it was, a detailed, hand-drawn map of my neighborhood, laid out in precise, elegant lines of ink. I felt a thrill of anticipation, the kind an architect gets when looking at a perfect blueprint. I ran my finger down the index, found my lot number 114, and traced its boundaries. The map was a tapestry of legal definitions. Solid lines marked property boundaries. Dashed lines indicated utility easements for water and sewer lines. Dotted lines showed setback requirements. I scanned every inch of my lot and the common area behind it. There was nothing. No line. No notation. No text indicating a view corridor easement. It did not exist. It was, just as I had suspected, a complete fabrication. Carol's entire case was built on sand. "Can I get a certified copy of this page?" I asked Robert, my voice tight with excitement. Sure thing, he said, already moving toward a large format scanner. Cost you $20. As he worked, I asked him another question. Is it possible to see the original easement deeds for a specific property? He nodded. Lot 114, you said. Let's see what we've got. He led me to a microfiche machine and, after a few minutes of clanking and whirring, pulled up the deed history for my property. We scrolled through the digital images of old, typewritten documents until we found the original deed from the developer to the first homeowner. It listed every single restriction and easement tied to the land. I read it twice. Utility easements. Yes. A drainage easement. Yes. A view corridor easement. Absolutely not. The HOA's claim was not just an interpretation. It was a lie. I felt a surge of triumph. This was it. This was the silver bullet. Official, legally binding documents that vaporized Carol's case. On a hunch, I asked one more thing. I also need copies of the HOA's filings specifically. Any resolutions passed by the board in the last year. Robert directed me to another clerk who handled corporate filings. After another search, she produced a thin file. Most of it was boilerplate annual reports, but near the back was a board resolution dated 6 months ago, right after Carol took office. It was titled Resolution on Enforcement Priorities for Aesthetic Covenants. It was the policy she was using to justify her crackdown. But, as I looked closer, I saw it. The entire second paragraph, the one presumably detailing the substance of the new enforcement policy, was blacked out with a thick, heavy marker. It was completely redacted. Why is this blacked out? I asked the clerk. She shrugged. They filed it that way. Said their lawyer advised it was due to pending enforcement actions. It's not standard, but it's not illegal for them to file it like that. My triumph was now mixed with a sense of deep unease. They weren't just misinterpreting the rules. They were actively hiding them. The plat map proved their case was baseless. The redacted minutes proved they knew it was weak enough to require concealment. This wasn't just a misguided HOA president on a power trip. This was a deliberate, calculated abuse of process. I paid for certified copies of everything: the plat map, the easement deed, and the redacted resolution. Walking out of the county building and into the bright sunlight, I felt like I was carrying a briefcase full of dynamite. The hearing was in 1 week, and I was ready. The elation of my discovery at the county recorder's office was short-lived. Just 2 days before the scheduled hearing, another certified letter arrived. My stomach clenched as I signed the green card. I had a sickening feeling about what was inside. I was right. This letter was thicker, printed on heavy bond paper, and its language was the most aggressive yet. At the top, in bold, capital letters, were the words, "Notice of intent to place lie-in." The text below was a chilling recitation of legal threats. It stated that due to my continued failure to cure the violation and remit payment for outstanding fines, which had now ballooned to over $800, the association would be placing a lien on our property. It detailed the consequences: a negative mark on our credit rating, the inability to sell or refinance our home, and, if the debt remained unpaid, the potential for foreclosure proceedings. The threat was no longer procedural. It was existential. They were threatening to take our home. I felt a wave of hot, helpless rage wash over me. I had the evidence to prove them wrong, but they were escalating anyway, trying to intimidate me into submission before I even had a chance to present it. I threw the letter on the counter. "Can they do this?" Sarah picked it up, her face grim as she read it. "Legally, yes. An HOA can place a lien for unpaid fines. It's their ultimate weapon, but they have to follow due process. And a lien is usually the last resort after a homeowner has lost a hearing and refuse to pay. They're jumping the gun. They're trying to scare you into folding before the hearing. It's working, I admitted. My voice strained. This is our home, Sarah. Everything we have is tied up in this house. She came over and put her hands on my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. Her gaze was steady, a rock in the storm of my anxiety. Listen to me, Michael. This is a scare tactic. It's the move of a bully who knows their position is weak. They're threatening you with a lien because they know you can win the hearing. Don't let them get in your head. We have the facts. We have the official documents. All we have to do is stay calm and present the evidence. The public hearing is our only chance, and it's our best chance. Her confidence was infectious. She was right. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. The next 2 days were spent in meticulous preparation. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was an attorney preparing for trial. I created a simple, powerful presentation. I scanned the plat map, highlighting my lot. I scanned the easement deed. I scanned the redacted resolution. I arranged them in a logical sequence, designed to dismantle Carol's case piece by piece, in front of an audience of our neighbors. The evening of the hearing arrived. The community clubhouse was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Word had spread. This wasn't just my hearing. It was a referendum on Carol's presidency. I saw Mrs. Gable in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking small and terrified. She was there to support me, but I knew she was also there because her fate, and the fate of her gnomes, was tied to mine. As I was reviewing my notes, a man in an expensive-looking but slightly rumpled suit approached me. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Alan, the attorney for the association. Could I have a word with you in private?" We stepped into the hallway. His demeanor was smooth, conciliatory. "Michael," he began, "this has all gotten a bit out of hand. Don't you think a simple misunderstanding about a shed?" I said nothing, waiting. "My client, the board, is prepared to make you a generous offer," he continued. "They will waive all fines, in their entirety. They will formally approve your shed's location, retroactively. This all goes away, right now. All we ask in return is that you withdraw your request to speak tonight and sign a standard non-disclosure agreement." It was the perfect escape hatch, a way out of the stress, the fines, the threat of a lien. For a fleeting second, I was tempted. I could take the deal, and this nightmare would be over. Then, through the open doorway, I saw Mrs. Gable again. She was looking at the board members at the front of the room, her expression filled with a quiet dread. If I took this deal, I would be safe, but Carol's reign of terror would continue. Mrs. Gable would still face fines for her husband's gnomes. Other neighbors would still be targeted for petty, made-up infractions. Carol would have learned that intimidation works. I looked back at the lawyer. My personal stake was my family's peace and financial security. My limit had been my desire to avoid conflict. But that limit had been passed. This was bigger than my shed. "No, thank you," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I will not be withdrawing my request to speak." The lawyer's friendly mask dropped. His eyes went cold. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Thompson." "The mistake," I replied, "was made when your client sent me the first letter." I walked back into the room. My resolve hardened into steel. The secondary moral twist was no twist at all. It was a choice. And I had just made it. I was no longer fighting for myself. I was fighting for my community. The air in the clubhouse was thick with a tension you could almost taste. Every folding chair was taken, and residents lined the back wall, standing shoulder to shoulder at the front table. Carol sat flanked by the other 4 board members. The HOA's lawyer, Alan, sat beside her, whispering in her ear. On a large screen behind them, a digital timer was displayed in stark red numbers 500. Carol banged the gavel. This special hearing of the Architectural Control Committee is now in session. The matter before us is the violation on Lot 114, owned by Mr. Michael Thompson. The association will present its case, and then Mr. Thompson will be given 5 minutes to respond. The timer will be strictly enforced. Alan, the lawyer, stood up and gave a slick, confident presentation. He spoke of the board's duty to uphold the aesthetic integrity of Oakwood Heights. He cited Paragraph 8.4.2 and referred to the board's consistent and legally sound interpretation of the clause to protect shared visual assets, which he repeatedly called view corridors. He painted a picture of a reasonable board trying to work with an uncooperative homeowner. He never once mentioned my ACC approval. When he finished, Carol nodded gravely. "Thank you, Alan," she said. "Mr. Thompson, you have 5 minutes. Your time starts now." The red numbers on the screen began to count down. 4:59, 4:58, 4:57. I walked to the lectern, my heart pounding, but my hands were steady on the laptop I placed there. I connected it to the projector. The timer felt like a ticking bomb, designed to make me rush, to make me flustered. But I had rehearsed this. I was ready. "Good evening, members of the board, and my fellow neighbors," I began, my voice calm and clear, amplified by the small microphone. "My name is Michael Thompson. I am an architect, and I live at 124 Laurel Lane. I am here tonight because the board has fined me over $800 and threatened to put a lien on my home. I am going to use my 5 minutes to show you, with official documents, why their case has no basis in fact or in our governing documents." I clicked the first slide. A beautiful, high-resolution photograph of my shed appeared on the screen, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. "This is the structure in question," I said, "a structure for which I received full, written approval from this association's Architectural Control Committee before construction began." I clicked again. A scan of the formal violation notice appeared. "This is the accusation, which claims my approved shed violates a view corridor. The entire case presented by the board rests on the existence of this supposed view corridor." Another click. The screen now showed the full text of CC&R Section 8.4.2, Architectural Harmony and Aesthetics. This is the rule they are citing. As you can see, it is a vaguely worded clause about aesthetics. The phrase view corridor does not appear anywhere in this section. In fact, it does not appear anywhere in our CC&Rs. A murmur went through the room. People were leaning forward, listening intently. The board claims the authority to interpret this clause as they see fit, but that interpretation cannot create a legal restriction that does not exist. The final authority on easements and property restrictions is not the board's opinion. It is the official plat map filed with the county. I clicked to the next slide. The certified copy of the Oakwood Heights plat map filled the screen. I had highlighted my property in yellow. This is the official plat map for our neighborhood. Survey number 78B from the County Recorder's Office. It details every single easement and restriction on our properties. As you can see, there are utility easements and setback lines. What you do not see, on my lot or any adjacent lot, is any mention, notation, or line indicating a view corridor. It is not there because it does not exist. This makes the board's interpretation, and the fines based upon it, baseless. The collective intake of breath in the room made the silence feel heavy. pressing. The other board members were staring at the screen, then at Carol. Her face was a pale, waxen mask. This isn't just a mistake. It appears to be a deliberate misrepresentation, and the board's actions suggest they know their position is weak. My final click brought up the image of the redacted board resolution. When I requested the records for the board meeting where this new enforcement priority was supposedly passed, this is what I received from our management company. As you can see, the section detailing the actual policy has been improperly redacted. A validly passed rule does not need to be hidden from the homeowners it governs. This suggests the vote itself may not have been valid, or that it contains information the board does not want us to see. I turned from the screen to face the board directly, my eyes on Carol. So, to summarize, the board has targeted me for violating a non-existent view corridor, based on a secret interpretation of a vague rule, and has done so despite the fact that I followed all procedures and received prior approval. They have ignored my evidence, escalated fines, and threatened my home with a lien, all while hiding the very document that supposedly gives them the authority to do so. I looked out at my neighbors. This isn't just about my shed. This is about due process. It is about transparency. It is about an abuse of power that affects every homeowner in this room. I lowered my voice, letting the quiet intensity of my words fill the room. The board has acted outside the authority granted to it by the governing documents. Its actions are illegitimate, and its fines are invalid. I am asking the committee not only to dismiss this violation, but to call for a full, independent review of the board's recent enforcement actions. I finished just as the timer flashed 0:05. The room was utterly silent for a beat, a moment of suspended disbelief. Then, the murmurs began. They started at the back and rolled forward like a wave. Neighbors turned to each other, whispering, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. The board members at the table were no longer looking at me. They were looking at Carol, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. One of them, a man named Tom, pushed his microphone forward. "Carol," he said, his voice tight. "Is this true? Did you know there was no easement on the plat map?" Carol's composure finally cracked. "The board has the discretion to—" "That's not an answer," a voice shouted from the audience. The room erupted. The carefully controlled order of the meeting shattered into 100 angry questions. Carol banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the noise. Her authority had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. The chaos in the clubhouse was not one of rage, but of revelation. The polite fiction of Carol's benevolent authority had been torn away, exposing the rot of her administration. Tom, the board member who had first challenged her, stood up. "I think," he said, his voice cutting through the din, "that Mr. Thompson has raised some extremely serious questions. Questions that this board has a duty to answer." He looked down the table at his colleagues, who nodded in agreement, avoiding Carol's furious gaze. "I want to know why the minutes were redacted." Another board member, a woman named Maria, added, "I voted on that resolution, and I don't recall agreeing to hide its contents." From the back of the room, a homeowner I didn't know stood up. "I make a motion," he called out, "for a full, independent review of all fines and violations issued in the last 6 months, and an immediate audit of the contract with Patriot Management." Seconded came a chorus of voices. Carol banged her gavel again, a frantic, rattling sound. "This is out of order. There is no such motion on the agenda." "Then, I make a motion to add it to the agenda," the man yelled back. The room roared its approval. The HOA's lawyer, Alan, leaned over and whispered urgently to Carol. But she shook her head, her face pale and blotchy with anger. She had lost control completely. The residents were no longer asking for permission. They were taking charge. Tom called for a vote. It was a landslide. 4 of the 5 board members, everyone but Carol, voted in favor. The motion passed. Her authority gone. Her allies vanished. Carol simply sat there, staring blankly as the community she had ruled with an iron fist dismantled her power structure in a matter of minutes. The hearing for my shed was forgotten, replaced by a much larger and more significant proceeding, the inquest into her entire presidency. The meeting ended with the board scheduling an emergency session to begin the audit process. Residents clustered together, talking excitedly, sharing their own stories of petty fines and harassment. Several people came up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me for speaking up. Mrs. Gable gave me a hug, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Michael," she whispered. "You gave us all courage." The victory was decisive, but it felt strangely incomplete. The how of Carol's downfall was clear, but the why of her crusade remained a mystery. Why go to such extraordinary lengths over a shed? Why fabricate a rule and risk everything for such a petty grievance? It felt disproportionate, personal. A few weeks later, the audit was complete. The findings were damning. The independent reviewer found that over 70% of the violation notices issued under Carol's presidency were procedurally questionable or lacking documentary basis. The contract with Patriot Management was found to contain clauses that gave them a financial incentive for issuing fines. A clear conflict of interest. The board voted unanimously to terminate the contract, reverse all outstanding fines from the past 6 months, and issue a formal censure of Carol for gross malfeasance and acting outside the scope of her authority. She resigned the next day. Her email a short, bitter note that blamed a campaign of misinformation by disgruntled residents. The fines on our account vanished. An official letter of apology from the new board president arrived in our mailbox. The threat was over. Peace had returned to Oakwood Heights. The final piece of the puzzle arrived on a quiet Friday evening. Sarah came home from work later than usual, carrying a thin manila file. She dropped it on the kitchen table. "I think you'll want to see this," she said. I opened it. Inside was a copy of a police report from 3 years ago. It detailed a DUI arrest following a single vehicle accident. The driver, a 19-year-old man, had been belligerent and uncooperative. His name was Daniel Peterson, Carol's son. I scanned down to the bottom of the report to the name of the arresting officer. It was Deputy Sarah Thompson. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The aggression, the personal nature of the attacks, the relentless, illogical pursuit of a violation. It was never about a shed. It was never about a view corridor or property values. It was a petty, bureaucratic vendetta. Carol couldn't touch Sarah, a uniformed officer of the law. So she had come after her family, using the only power she had, the HOA. She had used the covenants as a weapon to wage a secret, personal war against the woman who had arrested her son. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with a sad, knowing expression. "She held on to that for 3 years," I said, a sense of wonder mixing with my disgust. "All of this, because of a DUI. Some grudges run deep," Sarah said quietly. "She was trying to hurt me by hurting you, by threatening the one thing we built together." The next morning, I saw Mrs. Gable in her yard, carefully arranging her ceramic gnomes back in her flower bed. They stood in a cheerful, defiant line, their pointy red hats like little flags of victory. I walked over with a folder in my hand. It contained a simple form letter I had drafted, a template for residents to formally request the reversal of their fines, citing the findings of the audit. "I thought this might help," I said, handing it to her. She took it, her smile radiant. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." I stood there for a moment, watching her. The sun was warm, the neighborhood was quiet, and the sense of community, so long suppressed under Carol's rule, was finally beginning to return. My shed stood peacefully in my backyard, a symbol not of defiance, but of the simple, hard-won peace of a home defended. The war was over, won not with shouting or threats, but with research, with evidence, and with the quiet courage of standing up for a principle in a public forum. The system that had been designed to control us had ultimately become the instrument of our liberation.